When you're thinking about getting prepared for this project, you might want to think about preparing your surface in a more experimental way. So I've been kind of like experimenting and developing my own methods of like prepping my surface in unexpected ways. I want to show you some of those things. So one thing you can think about is just like adding some texture to your gesso. So in this one, I've got some modeling paste, as well as just sort of like moving my gesso across the image in a really sort of like experimental way. And modeling paste is basically like a really thick medium that you can use with a palette knife, and you can just sort of like sculpt directly onto your canvas with it. It's really satisfying. You can also tint it, so you can mix paint in with it if you'd like. But to prepare my surface with texture before you can get started, I'm actually going to sort of model with it first, and then I'll paint over top of it with gesso, and then I'll get started with my painting. That being said, you can also use this later on in stages. After you've got a painting nice and like built up, then you can use this to sort of like apply another layer that makes it really come out into the foreground. There's all sorts of brands of modeling things. This is a cheap one I got at Michael's, but they also have really fancy ones. And if you want to pass this around, this is kind of like what the modeling paste kind of feels like. Another thing I like to do with my gesso is to kind of like use a paintbrush, and I'll squeeze my gesso all over the surface, then I'll kind of like slap it to create these moments where it sort of picks up the gesso. So that can be a way of kind of like creating some what might look like lichen or some sort of like texture that's coming off the surface. Another thing you can do, and something that I've been exploring, is doing washes on top of my prepared surface, just as a first layer. So this painting, I've just done some preliminary washes to. So I've got some washes of like orange and yellow, and then I went on top of this like sage green, and I'm just working really improvisationally. I'm just getting something down that I'm then going to respond to and work on top of. So this is just my very first layer. What's that?
I'm getting bee vibes.
Bee vibes? I can see that. But here this is like hot glue that I spread out on a sheet of paper. It's like, I don't know, I made it into like this springy sort of texture, and then I glued that with some gloss gel, or you can use gloss medium as well as an adhesive. I glued that down here, then gessoed it, then I did washes. And I really like applying texture and then doing washes and then actually sanding down my surface. So with a little bit of sandpaper, I can reveal more texture. And I can really kind of like bring out the texture in some different interesting ways. So it'll make it a little bit more dramatic by sanding into it. And that's one way that you can work reductively with acrylics, is by incorporating some sanding into your process. So to make a wash, I'm going to show y'all on this one right here. So if you want to get up close, you're welcome to. But I've got some water here, and I'm going to mix in a little bit of medium before I add my paint. Why would I do that? Why can't I just like dilute the heck out of my paint with water?
Because it's gonna overload it might overload the canvas.
It might overload the canvas, could be.
Break
Any
up-
other ideas?
Break up the binder.
Yeah, break down the binder. So by flooding it with the vehicle of water, I am breaking down the binder. So I'm actually going to need to add some medium in order to add more binder back into the solution. So I can just sort of like pour in some gloss medium and then like kind of whip it up a little bit. I'm going to add some of this Flow Aid, which is basically a liquid. So you'll see it's it drops like water. It's like a liquid binder that you can just add with water to sort of like make this stick better. And then I'm just gonna I'm gonna add some paint. So if you have something like fluid acrylics, this is really easy for making washes with. That being said, you can also add heavy body acrylics and just kind of like whip it up in your cup. If you have like want to bring a spoon, it's kind of fun. Kind of feels like cooking.
Except you can't eat this.
Except you can't eat this, exactly. So I'll just like mix this up. Now I have a nice like liquid solution of paint, which I can then just pour directly on my surface. And because I've prepared it with all these textures, that's gonna make my washes a little bit more dramatic. So you're gonna be able to sort of like really see the texture come out when I add these washes. And then I typically like to sort of like drop paint into my washes a little bit and see how things disperse. So this is another fluid acrylic. That being said, you can make anything fluid by, on your palette, adding medium and adding water to sort of like whip it into a new consistency. And then I really like to sort of move things around, see what happens, see how things bleed together. This also just like feels really good to do. So even if you like don't know how this relates to your concept, you might just want to do it because it's fun. That's totally valid. And that's something I really encourage y'all to do with this project, is just like have fun and explore and experiment, because y'all have been working really hard, sort of like mastering realism, and now I want you to get into some of the more like experimental modes of working with paint, because everything is like a valid way of working with paint. So now I would let this dry for a long time. So I'm gonna leave this here for a couple hours, but then we also have flat racks in the back of the classroom. So like over on that side, we have flat racks that y'all can leave your paintings to dry within. So if you wanna do something like this, I recommend leaving it flat as long as you can in the place where you poured it, so that it doesn't shift around. That being said, you can also like shift things around on purpose and make interesting things happen just by moving it. But then I recommend leaving it to dry over in the flat rack storage. But their complementary colors are kind of fun. And the modeling paste looks really dramatic. So that's kind of exciting. So another thing I want to show y'all is the idea of like scraping paint with something like a squeegee or a spatula or something like that. So on this painting, I'm going to do some scraping. And I want to make sure, whenever you're handling the canvases, make sure you're not like pushing your canvas out or holding it in a weird way or leaning it in a way where it's getting poked, because that will like forever warp your canvas. So to lean this properly, I'm going to make sure that the wood is leaning on something, not the canvas. But I can, let's see, what do I need here? I'm gonna use some, I'm gonna actually pour some down, and then I'll show you how I can scrape it across. But I'm gonna first just like squeeze some paint directly onto my canvas. Let's see. And then this is interference violet. So Golden makes these iridescent paints that are freaking beautiful. It's kind of expensive, but like I've had this tube for so long, and it's like my most treasured paint item. And basically, it looks more violet in different lighting situations. So as light hits it, it's going to appear purple, and then it's going to appear transparent when light isn't hitting it. And there's mica in it. So if you've ever been on a hike and there was like sparkly rocks on the ground that are kind of flaky, that's mica, and you can actually collect it and crush it up and make this, and put it in a medium, like a gloss medium. So now that I've applied some paint, I can take a squeegee or a spatula of some kind, and I can just scrape this across my surface, and it's really satisfying to do. Feels really good. Isn't it nice? And it makes a totally different kind of mark than I could ever get with a paintbrush. There's something about using a paintbrush where it's like, I have so much control over this. I have to really make it my own. And sometimes I like using processes where I don't have to have so much control, because it just sort of feels better. It's more about like collaborating with the materials a little bit. But yeah, so scraping something with a squeegee, or I could even do this with like a piece of plexi if I wanted. So I could squeeze some paint onto the end of a piece of plexiglass, or like even a piece of plastic you cut off of like a to-go container. You can make a little spatula out of that, and then you can scrape with it. I really like layering it this way, and then I'm working really kind of improvisationally, and then I'll look at what I've got, and I'll ask myself, where is the foreground? Where's the middle ground? Where's the background? And then I'll start to create figure-ground relationships by applying a light source. So I'll be like, okay, the light is here, and then I'll apply all my shadows going in the opposite direction. So that's one way of working more improvisationally, where you're really letting the materials and the processes guide what the image is in general. So if you want to work in that way and really make it more about like an unconscious exploration of your brain, that can be a really fun way of working. So scraping is fun. Also check out my board. I applied gesso this morning, but I guess it wasn't totally dry, and now it's creating this like really cool like crazing effect. It's really beautiful and weird. Not what I was going for, but like sick. Let's do it. Okay, so the last couple of things I wanted to talk to you about are paint skins and collage and photo transfer. So just so y'all know, I have demos of all these things in the module of most of these things, like individual demos of them. If you forget what something is, you can check there or just ask me. But this is a paint skin. So I made this with the iridescent medium. I love how like disgusting and beautiful it is at the same time. It's like really, it's a paint skin, so it's kind of like skin-like. Kind of looks, yeah, like a butterfly wing, totally. And the interference violet is what made it so beautiful like that. It's so fun. But then I also like cut up little collage pieces of magazines, and I made little like bits of confetti and dropped it into the paint skin to create kind of like these interesting textures. I'm gonna pass it around. And I made that basically by, on a piece of plexiglass, I just mixed up a thick sort of section of medium, added my paint to it, and then I scraped it across, and it made it nice and thick, and then I left it to dry. But actually, paint skins work way better on glass than they do plexi, because acrylic paint is basically like plexiglass, so it will kind of like bond. So you can scrape it up from plexi, but it takes a lot of elbow grease, it's a lot easier on glass. So I recommend using a glass palette if you're going to do a paint skin. But in these little collages, I was collaging with paint skins, as well as like images from magazines and construction paper. And now I'm using a colored pencil, and I'm gonna maybe add some acrylic on top, but you're welcome to like get up close and check those out at some point if you want. But I've just applied a paint skin over top of another section with medium. So I used my like gloss gel as an adhesive. So whenever y'all want to just collage anything to your canvas, you can just use some gloss medium or gloss gel as your adhesive. So if you want to include actual collage and go through magazines and cut things up and collage things physically in, or collage your actual photos that you took for the project into your image, you're more than welcome to use like a medium to encase your photos in the layers of your paint. Does that make sense? So the last thing I want to show y'all is photo transfer. So this is a photo transfer that I made on plexiglass. And so I basically cut out an image of some water from a magazine. And then what's happening here is it's lots of layers of gloss medium. And basically the ink from the photograph is suspended in layers of medium. And if you want to pass that around, go for it. So I have, I'm just going to show y'all real quick what that looks like. So here I have my image that I've cut out from a magazine. And I've already coated the front side of the image with a bunch of layers of gloss medium. You want to have at least 3 layers of gloss medium on both the front of your image and on the surface itself. So I have a section here that's nice and glossy that I've coated with gloss medium 3 times. And now that I'm ready to transfer it, I'm going to take my medium and I'm going to apply a final layer of medium to both my surface and to the front of the image. So I'm just going to scrape this on with a palette knife, and again, sometimes I really like the texture I can get from a palette knife better than the texture I get from my paintbrush, and it's pretty fast to apply it. So I've scraped that on nice and thick. So after you've done 3 layers of medium on both the front and on the surface you're transferring it to, I'm going to do a final layer of like wet on wet medium. And it's really important that you don't get any medium on the back of your image. And I'll show you in a minute why that is. But, okay, so now that I have some medium on the front of my photograph, which it is important that it's a laser jet print and not an inkjet print, because inkjet prints are water soluble, so it'll just wash away the ink. So you check which kind of printer you're using before you do this process. Or a magazine page almost always works. So this is a page from a magazine. So now that I have 2 wet layers, I can take this and just place it right on top and let it dry. And I'm gonna try to like get out the air bubbles a little bit. Wherever there's an air bubble, it won't really transfer. So, you wanna really kind of like press it down nice and good. And then I'll let that dry for about like overnight basically, because I wanna make sure it's totally dry before I scrape away and rub away the paper pulp. So, yeah. So now I'm gonna let this dry for a full day. And I have one that's been in the oven. And so, not actually in the oven, but I let this one dry overnight. So this one I'm actually transferring to a paint skin. And so now at this point, once it's totally dry, I'm gonna take some water and I'm basically just gonna rub away the paper pulp. And so this is gonna rub away the other layer of your magazine page, like the back side of it. And it should reveal just your ink suspended in your medium. So I typically like to do this with a sponge, like a wet sponge, but I don't have one today. So I'm just gonna use my hands. But basically, you can, and I recommend starting with your fingers so you can kind of get the feel for it, because you can accidentally peel away part of your paint skin or part of your photo transfer on accident. So I can really kind of like just rub it away, scrape away the paper pulp, and then I'm going to be left with my image. And so this one was like a aerial view of some old islands on a river, something like that. So you'll see, I won't pass this around because it's really wet and slimy and I don't want y'all to have to touch it. But you'll see now my image is suspended. So wherever you have something that's a white or light in your photo transfer, that part is going to end up being transparent. So you'll be able to see through to whatever's underneath it. So it can be a really fun way of layering things in space. And where's my let's see. I don't know, I lost it. But it can be a really fun way of creating a sense of layering by having like one section of something going on, and then you can have an overlapped or an overlaid image that's suspended over top that has transparency, so you can see through the layer beneath it. It's pretty awesome. The main thing is you need to do this on a surface that can handle the water. So if I did that on like a really thin piece of paper, it would probably not be able to handle it. But you can always treat your paper with gloss medium to basically laminate it and cover it in plastic, and that'll help. But yeah, I think that's about it. Does anyone have any questions about prepping your surface, washes, modeling paste, texturizing things, doing making paint skins, collaging onto your surface, or photo transfer? I know that's like a million techniques I just showed you.
Can you photo transfer directly onto the canvas?
Yes, absolutely. So if I wanted to photo transfer on here, I would just prep this whatever section with the 3 layers of gloss medium, and it actually works like excellent on canvas or wood or any surface. And then I could even do a photo transfer over this entire canvas as like another layer. And basically you're just going to stick your image face down, make sure there's no medium on the back of your photo. And after you have all those layers of medium in between, you can then rub away the paper pulp and you'll be left with a layer of photo through which you can see whatever was underneath it. Yeah. Any other questions? Anything at all? Any like ideas that you're thinking about? I'm sure. Yeah.
Photo transfers with like just plain text.
Yeah, absolutely. That could be a really cool way of creating text without having to like painstakingly match a font with a paintbrush. And the main thing I would do is make sure it's a laser jet print and not an inkjet. And normally you can tell by the printer. But normally like coded magazine pages work fine. So if you want to like cut out like a ransom note type, word out of a magazine and transfer those letters, that would work. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, keep in mind you can put anything in acrylic paint, and you can paint with acrylic on anything. Like you can paint with acrylic on fabric. You can do anything.
Just spray paint and acrylics and solvent.
Absolutely.
Could we use?
Yeah. So I would say if you're going to do spray paint, to try to do it on your own outside of class and then bring it in, just because it, even if you spray paint outside of class and then bring your painting in, it's so fumey. So I do that outside of the mats. And you can even do like wet on wet spray paint, where you can like spray a section and then take another color and spray into it, and it creates these beautiful like unexpected textures. It looks like constellations.
We have a like area of work because I accidentally stayed in the house too many times.
Perfect.
So
Yeah. So spray painting could absolutely be one layer of your painting. You can spray paint early on or later, the last thing you do or the first thing you do. Yeah. Any other questions? Huh?
How many weeks are we looking at for this painting?
Good question. I need to double check,
Okay.
but I'm pretty sure you don't have a ton of time. So this is more of like a quick experimental painting. So I recommend today, go ahead and do something to your canvas. And if you still need to get your canvas, I would recommend after we're done with class, and we've talked through your ideas, going to grab your canvas and do some preparatory things to it, and then start to build up your image. So this will be a faster project than our last. Because our last, we were really doing like painstakingly detailed realism. This time, it's like, I just want y'all to have fun and experiment and play with paint. So it's gonna be a faster process. And it's okay if like your painting ends up looking really weird.
It's not weird, it's creative.
Yes, I want y'all to prioritize taking risks and having fun and trying new things over the idea of making a perfect finished product. So focus on the process or the product for this one. Yeah, any other questions you could think of? Cool. So in the module for project 2, there's a ton of videos of different things to think about. Also, for those of you who are like digital artists or who like are, you know, always working in your sketchbook or things like that, you can totally take photos or scan something and then print that out and overlay that or collage it physically into your painting. So if there's like a kind of art that you really love doing that isn't normally with a paintbrush, you're more than welcome to print out your digital painting or print out your, you know, whatever it is that you've been up to, or like cyanotype on a layer of your canvas. Incorporate any sort of like cross-disciplinary ways of working that you like. Yeah, any other questions? Okay, cool. Well, thanks y'all, thanks for watching. Thank you so much, Elise, for taking the video.
Like, subscribe.
Like,